It is time for our nation to change the conversation. Find out what I mean on this episode of Pushback.
Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go. Go, Jonny, go, go.
If you're concerned about the direction our culture is heading, then maybe it's time to push back. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Pushback. I want to get right into the topic today because it's been kind of an emotional week for me because the Holy Spirit has really been talking to me, and I've really had an interesting personal experience that I want to share with you about this topic that we've already discussed. And I've had just this unique recurring experiences of listening mostly to sports personalities regarding our race conflict that's been happening in our country. You know, this is not going away, and I'm super grateful for that because I feel like there has been some forward progress, although it being slow. I'm heartened by the fact that this isn't completely going away or being brushed off or being distracted with other things, but that we keep going back to this topic about the pain in race relations in our country. Now, if you haven't heard my previous podcasts, the Brown Initiative or The Answer is Black and White, I really encourage you to maybe even pause this podcast and go back and listen to those, because it'll give you even a greater context for really what I want to share today. And really what I've become quite passionate about. My wife will testify that I've been emotional about this, and the Holy Spirit has really been talking to me in a real deep way, especially this week. I've been turning on the radio and listening to things, following Vikings news and Twins and the things that I care about in the sports world, and yet repeatedly it's been going back to this topic about our race relationships and the black and white communities. Now, for those of you who have heard my previous podcasts know that I take perhaps a different stance than what you've heard. According to the Bible and according to biology and science, there actually are no races. You know, the Bible is super clear that we are all descendants of Adam and Eve and ultimately Noah, if you read and believe the Bible and what it actually says. And that was only probably 6,000 to 10,000 years ago when this occurred. And so I don't believe that there's been that long of a period of time. Now, if you believe in an evolutionary dogma, which I believe is super dangerous and destructive, that they would argue that there are a concept of 5 different races. And when they did the Human Genome Project, I believe right around 2002, 2003, interestingly, they expected to be able to find genetically that there would indeed be 5 different races that you could tell just simply by looking at your genes. Clearly, however, they did not find that. In the biological and the social sciences, the consensus is clear that race is actually a social construct. Please hear me in this. A social construct, not a biological attribute. They actually found that the lines between what would be considered to be races are actually very blurred. And now we have these ancestry companies that want to test your DNA and tell you what race you belong to. But if you actually look closer at what they are offering and what they are advertising, you will notice that they are actually using the term ancestry and not the word race. Why are they doing that? Because they can genetically tell geographically maybe where you have come from, but interestingly, just looking at the genes, they can't even tell you what we traditionally would call your race. It's interesting, isn't it? The Bible, confirmed by actual science and biology, says there are no races. So if this is true, then my friends, we need to change the conversation. I mentioned at last podcast that I saw a protester with a sign up that says change the conversation. And I so would like to have been there next to him and ask him what he means by that. What is his goal? What would he be looking for in conversationally that he would like to see change in our nation, in our country? Well, I would submit that this is the number one issue. Just as Morgan Freeman explained, I would ask that you stop calling me a black man, and I'm going to stop calling you a white man. As long as we keep using these terms that are inaccurate, because the whitest of white man or woman is not white. They are light brown. The darkest of black man is not black. He's dark brown. We are the same color, all just different shades of brown based on our melanin, and we actually have no genetic racial differences among us. We are one race, we are one blood. It makes a huge difference. It makes a tremendous change in the conversation that we have with each other, with our children, the way we look at each other, the way that we see each other as children of God. It should and ought to change completely the way that we think. You know, I decided to go really deep diving into this because I believe that the Holy Spirit has really been compelling me this week to break off even things that I thought I knew and go into just a little bit deeper. You know, what is racism? Well, if you look at the definition of racism, as you know about me, I love words. The definition says discrimination or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular race. Or the belief, this is critical, now listen, the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. This is critical. See, now, I would argue, and I don't say this in any type of arrogant or self-serving way, that I, by that definition, cannot be a racist because I don't believe that races actually exist. And if we believe that, then we have to knock down that dogma, the discrimination, the antagonism against a person based on race, because we are all the same. But critical to the storyline of our nation is to see each other as possessing distinct characteristic abilities or qualities, especially so as to distinguish us from each other as inferior or superior. Oh, that's critical, and that's at the heart of some of the hatred and pain that has been historically in the races of our country. See, I believe that if what we just read is true, then I believe an alternative definition of racism is a belief that there are different races. Oh, I'm stirring the pot now. I believe racism is actually a belief that there are different races. Because at the heart of that belief is that perhaps my race is superior to your race. There is an evolutionary dogma, if you would believe in that, that's inherent and it's evil and it's ugly into that. Because if we are evolving separately among races, then perhaps one race is more evolved than the other. That's what Darwin believed. So I looked at the word ethnicity. Now, ethnicity is the fact or state of belonging to a social group that has a common national or cultural tradition. There's the buzzword, cultural. I love the word culture. That's what this podcast is about. It's about pushing back against an unhealthy culture to create health and wholeness in our culture. So ethnicity is the fact or state of belonging to a social group that has a common national or cultural tradition. So can you have ethnicism? Say that 3 times fast. Can you have ethnicism like racism? Well, ethnicism is an emphasis upon ethnic identity and a prejudice based on ethnic origin. See, my friends, words matter. I'm connecting some dots here, I hope, for you today. So, I am interested. See, now, racism is directly connected to the color of your skin, supposedly. Ethnicism is connected to a national or cultural tradition. So that's a social construct as well that is connected to where you live and the culture in which you live. So because of that, I am super interested in an American ethnicity. I believe that is malleable, I believe that is adjustable, and I believe right now we're in the fire that brings change and hope and healing to this ethnic discussion that we are having even in our country. Because it's about our country. It's about our national or cultural tradition. Can that be switched? Can that change? Can our mindset change? Can we change to create a healthier American ethnicity? I think the answer is yes. So, at the heart of the word of the definition I just gave is the word prejudice. If we can't really have or not supposed to have racism because there are no races, I know that's a pie in the sky idea, but if that's true in my own brain, then what about prejudice? See, I believe that we're really pulling back the layers of the onion and getting down to the root core of what is happening culturally in our society. Not only happening, but getting exposed. The definition of prejudice: a preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. The root word found in the word prejudice is a prejudgment. A prejudgment that is not based on reason. So please see my scientific argument about race previously. It's not even reasonable to talk about races because we've just proven it about 15, 20 years ago that there are no races. Or actual experience. We have a belief system, something perhaps in our brain, that is based on non-even actual experience. Prejudgments are always an internal problem or a problem of the heart. If it is a problem of the heart, I just believe that the Holy Spirit revealed to me three F's. Three F's of why we operate or could operate and maybe not even know that we operate with a prejudice, a prejudgment. The first is fear. You've heard me talk so many times on this podcast about being motivated or making decisions from a place of fear. But see, fear is a cunning adversary. It's not rational. Remember, we were talking about the definition of prejudice, not based on reason. You fear losing what you have. You fear violence. You fear the uncertainty of life. The second is failure. It has everything to do with identity. See, if we are a failure or we perceive ourselves as a failure, then we can buoy ourselves. We can feel better if we know that we're just simply better than the person next to us. It's been true all throughout history. It started with Cain and Abel shortly after sin entered the world, where all of a sudden they looked at each other's offering and realized that they didn't measure up. Cain didn't measure up. All throughout the Bible, we saw ethnicism and racism. Even in Jesus' time with the Samaritans, there was prejudice that was placed, prejudgments based on fear and upon our own failure. We can feel a little bit better. Our insecurity, we can put a Band-Aid over our insecurity if we know that we're just better than somebody else. It's ugly. And the third F, and this one hurts me. This one hurts me, but I believe it's true. Because this is my life calling. I've been called to the family and bringing healing and wholeness to the family. But the third F is the word family. Because I believe that there are roots and there are generational prejudices that are passed down. Generationally. And it happens quickly. As soon as we utter a word about a different group. Families that use the N-word or families that scoff at other supposed races. There is a prejudgment when we say that all blacks are just thugs and criminals. Guess what? That gets set into our children's mind. It passes on to generations. When we cross the street and walk on the other side, or try to avoid people of different skin color, or we feel personally uncomfortable, guess what? Our children are watching us, and it creates a prejudgment in their mind that's passed down generationally. Fear, failure, family. They create a prejudice. The Holy Spirit has been pricking in my own heart this week that there's some things inside of me that I didn't even know were there. And this conversation that we're having about race in our nation, because I love our nation so much, may have a little bit to do with me and some things that are inside my heart. But we have to know that the battle is not with flesh and blood. See, the enemy loves prejudgments. The enemy loves prejudice. He loves riots. He loves looting. He loves murder. His job description is to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what we've been doing to ourselves in this nation. And the enemy loves it. At the root of all of this is a spirit of division. A spirit of division. My wife and I minister against a spirit of division in family because it's real and it's powerful and it's ugly. Abraham Lincoln famously said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. You know, I feel emotional about this, but I also feel heartened, which is the opposite of feeling complacent. I feel heartened that what Abraham Lincoln spoke 150 years ago was a prophetic declaration over our country, and that we are getting to the root issues. See, my friends, there are still fellow citizens who feel enslaved in our own country. And I'm starting to feel it. I'll admit there were times that I maybe even scoffed at it and had my own prejudgments about it. But I've been driving back and forth. I've been working a lot this week, and I turn on the radio and I listen to a man named Rod Gilmore. He's a football analyst and he's an attorney, and he is a dark brown-skinned man. And he was sharing his stories, and I was listening to those, and I was moved by them. The next day I'm driving to work, and it's the exact same interview with Rod Gilmore, football analyst and attorney. And I felt like the Holy Spirit was saying, I know that you heard it the first time, but I want you to listen to it the second time. I want you to listen to what he has to say. And he was talking about his experience. He was of growing up as a black man. He would live in a black neighborhood, but he was bused to a white school. And he was walking to hang out with his friends in this white neighborhood. And the police would stop him and say, you know, are you lost? What are you doing here? And he said, I'm visiting my friends. And they said, you don't belong here. And they would follow him as he walked to his friend's house to make sure that that's where he was going. He talked about when he just became an attorney as a young man, and he was on his college campus, and he was stopped by the police. And the police questioned him because somebody had their bike stolen or something. And he was explained to the police, now as a new attorney, was saying, you can't stop me without telling me why you're apprehending me. And he said, you just keep quiet. And they ended up handcuffing him, and they ended up illegally putting him into a lineup. And he was ultimately then released, but he had many experiences. And my friends, I can tell you as a testimony here on this podcast, I've never had that experience. I never once worried about those types of experiences. And I've heard story after story after story. There's a man named Ray Roberts who used to play for the Detroit Lions, former NFL player, current Seahawks radio pregame and postgame analyst. And he quoted Enoch Waters. And he was the editor of the Associated Negro Press, who wrote a piece entitled The Only American. And this is what it says. The black man is the only American who came here not seeking freedom, because he had been robbed of it. Not looking for a home, because he had been snatched from his. not as a fugitive from persecution, because it awaited him, not in search of opportunity, because it was beyond his reach, not in pursuit of happiness, because he had left it behind, not hoping for love because there was none for him, and not willingly, because he came as a slave in chains. This is an experience that I don't fully understand. He said, even as a player in the NFL while a member of the Detroit Lions, he said, I was pulled over and asked to explain how I could afford such a nice car, or what work I did to afford it. He said he was stopped through his own neighborhood and asked why he was there. He was stopped one time in Redmond, Washington, and asked if he was lost. See, I believe what we are seeing, what we are feeling, and what we are witnessing in this moment is an uncovering or an exposing of a wound, Ray Roberts says, that was never meant to be tended to nor healed. And you know what? That breaks my heart. I love healing. And there is a wound that is being exposed that we have an opportunity to bring healing to. He goes on to write, and to those on the other side, you know the game that is being played, you know what the issues are, and you are choosing to be distracted. By doing so, you protect your level of comfort, and your comfort will be the reason our country will never be its best self. Choose to engage the discomfort of putting in the work. Challenge and defeat yourselves. It is an individual and personal journey, and use your privilege, access, resources, influence, knowledge, and power to step up and make a difference and deliver change. You know, I receive that call. I do. I love not being complacent, and I love this country being its best self, and that's what we are all after. Stephen A. Smith, another sports analyst who I've been listening to, when I first heard this, it bothered me because he was saying, what would he say to somebody like me that he would consider to be a white man? And he said, listen, just listen, and don't tell us that you understand. It kind of bothered me at first. I'm like, well, why would I listen if I can't understand? But you know what? I'm starting to get it. This week, I'm starting to get it. I can never really understand. I've never had those experiences. I heard even during the political convention, somebody was talking about that there's been hesitation by the African American community to call 911 because sometimes it means trouble. And that breaks my heart. That reduces me to tears because that's just wrong. It's wrong. And so when they're saying that we don't belong, that is an ethnic problem. What do I mean by that? Our nation or cultural tradition. See, I have an affirmative action story. I applied for medical school, and I remember hearing from the admission committee that there's only 2 spots available for a white male. And I remember being kind of ruffled by that. Like, that's not right. It can't matter on the basis of the color of my skin. But you know what, my friends? That is not the same. It is not the same as being afraid of being pulled over and being questioned for why you're in a neighborhood or being arrested for no reason. That is just not the same. We need to change the conversation. The best way that we can start changing the conversation is stop using the term white people and black people. We are one color. We are brown. Different shades of brown. We are one race. Our genetics prove it. Every time we do that, we continue the cycle of prejudgments, of prejudice. See, I think Black Lives Matter is reacting out of pain, and I respect it, and I even, dare I say, understand it. But I believe it is misguided, and I believe even the name Black Lives Matter is misguided because it's perpetuating the conversation of black versus white, us versus them, you versus me. It's creating and perpetuating the spirit of division in our country. We need to change the conversation where we begin to address each other as Americans, as fellow citizens, as brothers and sisters here on this earth, in this country, to set the ethnic, national, and cultural tradition. What is it going to look like? We get to control what that looks like. So my fellow Americans, not black Americans, not white Americans, my fellow Americans are hurting. And we need to listen for the health of our culture. One nation, we need to lead. This country should be leading. And we can change what we can. We don't need to worry about what other people can. We don't need to say, well, yeah, but the black community has a higher level of crime, or they need to take care of their families. All of those things are true. And if they ask for help in those areas, we need to be able to interject and bring health and wholeness. But we need to control what we can control, which is our own hearts. What is in here? What are our prejudgments that we carry, that we have learned even from our parents or grandparents? The things that are inside of us. What are we afraid of? What are we trying to cover up by our own insecurities? The three F's. Fear, failure, and family. The things that drive our own prejudgments. We need to look inward because we can know what is right and what is wrong. You can look at me as a white man. You can call me a white man, although I prefer you not. And if you do, you can say, well, what do you have to say about it? I can talk about this subject because I know the difference between right and wrong. And the way this group, this community has been treated, historically, even up to current events, has been wrong. And we can right the wrong. It's by looking inward. It's by looking inward. See, this is American as it gets. One nation under God. It saddens me, actually, that people are kneeling down before the flag. I get what they're doing, and I understand, and hopefully you heard my heart in that today. But the flag is not the problem. In fact, when we pledge allegiance to the flag, we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's all there. That's our national cry. That's what the Founding Fathers wrote. That was their intention. Did we do it perfectly? Have we historically made mistakes? Yes, but that is our goal. That's the light that we should be shining on. If I was at a rally, this is the sign that I would hold. One blood, one race, one color, which is brown, one nation. That's the conversation I would like to have. How do we achieve that? One blood, one race, one color, one nation. Now let's go together and set and change the culture.